On May 26, 2013, just before sunrise, the tugboat Jascon 4 was working off the coast of Nigeria. 12 crew members were on board, and one of them was 29-year-old cook Harrison Okene. For Harrison, the morning began like any other. He had gotten up and was in the bathroom when the vessel suddenly began to tilt. At first, it was only movement beneath his feet. Then everything changed in seconds. A powerful wave hit the tugboat, and the entire vessel rolled over. Harrison was thrown across the room as water rushed into the ship. The lights disappeared, objects crashed around him, and the narrow corridors became completely disorienting. With the boat upside down, Harrison could barely tell which direction led upward anymore. The Jascon 4 began sinking, carrying everyone inside with it. Harrison fought through the darkness, grabbing whatever he could as freezing seawater filled the compartments around him. He moved through the overturned interior, trying to find somewhere he could still breathe. There was almost no visibility, and every few seconds another sound echoed through the ship. Rushing water, shifting metal, pieces of equipment breaking loose. Somewhere nearby were the other members of the crew, but Harrison could not reach them. He had no idea who was still alive. Eventually, Harrison reached a small compartment where the water had stopped below the ceiling. The Jascon 4 had now reached the ocean floor, roughly 30 meters beneath the surface. Harrison was trapped inside an upside-down wreck at the bottom of the Atlantic. There was no light, no clear way out, and no way for him to know whether anyone above even realized he had survived. Hours passed, but Harrison had no way of knowing how many. There was no daylight, no clock he could rely on, and nothing outside the wreck that could tell him whether it was morning or night. He eventually made his way into the engineer's office. He found a mattress and other materials and used them to build a small platform, lifting as much of his body out of the cold water as he could. Harrison had no food and almost nothing to drink, and every hour he remained there made it harder to believe that anyone would reach him. He began to understand that he might be the only person left alive. Alone in the darkness, he prayed. Above the wreck, a search and rescue operation had already begun, but no survivors had been found. Eventually, the mission changed. Divers were sent down to the Jascon 4, not expecting to rescue anyone, but to enter the wreck. Then, after almost 60 hours of darkness, something changed. Harrison heard a sound that did not belong to the wreck. Somewhere nearby, something was moving through the ship. Harrison stayed still and listened. It was the diver. The diver moved slowly through the flooded wreck, shining his light into spaces where he expected to find only bodies. Then, as he entered the compartment where Harrison had been waiting, something suddenly reached out of the darkness and grabbed him. It was Harrison's hand. For a moment, the diver pulled back in shock. Nobody expected anyone inside the Jascon 4 to still be alive after more than 60 hours underwater. The diver immediately alerted the team above, and what had begun as a body recovery mission suddenly became a rescue operation. After spending so long 30 meters beneath the ocean, bringing him directly to the surface could have been extremely dangerous because his body had been exposed to the increased pressure for days. The rescue team gave him diving equipment, including a helmet that allowed him to breathe. Harrison then had to follow the divers through the same flooded wreck that had trapped him. Once he was brought up from the seabed, he was placed inside a decompression chamber, where the pressure around him could slowly be returned to normal. He remained there for roughly another 2.5 days before he could safely return to normal atmospheric pressure. When Harrison finally emerged, the full scale of what had happened became clear. Of the 12 people aboard the Jascon 4, he was the only survivor. Years later, instead of staying away from the ocean forever, Harrison returned to it. He trained as a commercial diver, eventually working underwater himself. The man who had once waited helplessly inside a sunken ship had gone back beneath the surface by choice.